What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Hot takes for the 2020 fantasy football season. This video, I thought it would be fun to play a game of who's this year's. So we're going to be looking at some players who broke out last season and trying to predict who's going to do the same this year. Before we start, of course, we got to do the stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was which running back had the most rush attempts inside the 10-yard line over the final 6 weeks last season. The answer was Joe Mixon. Really went off towards the end of the season, and Michael Collins was the first to get that one right. Today's stat: which wide receiver led all rookies in third down targets last season? All right, let's do some hot takes. So the first one is, who's this year's Lamar Jackson? Realistically, the answer is probably no one. It's pretty unrealistic to think another player is going to have 1,200 rushing yards and lead the league in touchdowns, right? But if there is one player who could do that, or at least get close to that, it's Josh Allen. Allen had 510 rushing yards and 9 rushing touchdowns last season en route to a quarterback 6 finish, despite throwing less than 3,100 passing yards. You got to do a whole lot on the ground to throw for less than 3,100 yards and still finish as a quarterback 6. And you know what? There's incredible upside to Allen's numbers this season. There's no reason to think that the rushing numbers will come down. Maybe the touchdowns will, but remember, we're trying to predict a Lamar Jackson season, right? So we're already under the assumption that this player is gonna be lucky with touchdowns. And we have that assumption for everyone on this list. Obviously, these guys could have incredible volume and still be bad because they get unlucky with touchdowns. But if you're gonna break out, you gotta be lucky with touchdowns. So if we assume those numbers stay the same, or perhaps even the volume increases a little bit because maybe the offense is a little better, then he doesn't need to add all that much in the passing department to finish as a top 3 quarterback. Allen was exactly 40 fantasy points off the QB3 finish from last season, which can be reached by adding 38 passing yards per game and 4 more passing touchdowns over the entire season, which is just 1 extra passing touchdown every 4 weeks. Those increases are extremely doable, especially since they're replacing this like Isaiah McKenzie, Robert Foster, Zay Jones grouping with Stephon Diggs. You know, Diggs was one of the only wide receivers who posts an above average success rate on every single route and is widely regarded as a top 3 route runner in the league. And a lot of people will say he's the best route runner. So you give Allen a true alpha receiver to pair with John Brown, who realistically should be considered a number 1 as well, with a consistent Beasley in the slot and Knox in his second season. There's absolutely no reason that we can't see Allen go off this year. That's why he's one of our very few early and mid-round quarterback targets, because his floor is incredibly high. I mean, unless he gets injured, there is just no way that he busts because of his rushing numbers and how good that offense can be with the addition of Diggs. But he's one of only a handful of quarterbacks that has a realistic shot at finishing as a QB1. There are a lot of quarterbacks you can get middle and late who will probably return value or could exceed value, but they don't have a path at finishing as the quarterback 1 unless there's just this like mass injury season at the quarterback position. But assuming people stay healthy, there are only a few players who have a chance to finish as the top overall quarterback, and Josh Allen is one of them, and I really think he has a strong chance of finishing the top 3. So I would not be surprised at all if he is this year's Lamar Jackson. The next question we have is, who is this year's Miles Sanders? This would be a rookie running back who starts off a little bit slow, not really playing all that many snaps to start the season, but then really breaks out down the stretch. Also, Sanders was taken in the middle rounds last season, so we can't include Clyde or Jonathan Taylor in this one because they're going a little bit too early. For me, that means your options are down to Cam Akers, DeAndre Swift, and J.K. Dobbins. All could see a split to start the season, and all are going in roughly the middle rounds. And they definitely all have a ton of upside if they ever do get the full workload. I'm going to choose Swift for this one because I see a lot of parallels with Miles Sanders last season. We've seen Kerryon Johnson struggle to stay healthy in these last 2 years, and an injury is how Miles Sanders finally got that full-time job last year. We know that Swift, like Sanders, is great in the receiving game, and that sets up well for him to be a featured back if he were to ever get the opportunity. And if they choose to let him play on 3 downs, we know that he can excel in that role. This isn't a player who is really good in the receiving game, but doesn't have the body or doesn't have the history to show that he can handle a full 3-down workload. We know that Swift can handle that. And we've seen Stafford feature his running backs in the receiving game, so it wouldn't be that surprising if Swift were to excel in that area. Plus, even though they spent similar draft capital on Kerryon as they did Swift, the fact that he struggled to stay on the field, coupled with using another high pick on a running back just 2 years after spending one on Kerryon, could signal that they don't really want Johnson to be the guy. So if they think Swift can handle the full workload, then they might slowly shift more and more work to him as the season goes on. So DeAndre Swift is my pick for this year's Miles Sanders. Who's going to be this year's Mark Andrews? For this pick, we need to find a tight end going in the 12th round or later who could finish as a top 3 tight end. And it doesn't need to be because of insane volume. Remember, Andrews had less than 100 targets last season, but he was the only tight end with double-digit touchdowns and was one of just 3 tight ends that had more than 6. So ideally, that's what we're targeting. We want someone on an elite offense that's going really late. And for me, the answer is pretty clearly Blake Jarwin. There's no quality tight end behind him on the roster, so he should easily double his snaps from last season. In 2019, we saw the corpse of Jason Witten operate as the top tight end, posting 63 for 529 and 4 touchdowns on 83 targets and finishing as the tight end 12 in fantasy. As to be expected, though, Witten was extremely inefficient on his targets. Despite Dak averaging a career-best 8.2 yards per attempt, Witten averaged an extremely low 6.37 yards per target. In fact, among 65 players with at least 83 targets last season, Witten was 60th in yards per target, and again, that's despite Dak ranking 6th in yards per attempt. Now, this sort of math is frowned upon because there are many other factors at play, but if we think about it simplistically, if we just gave Jarwin the exact same number of targets as Witten had last season, and he produced the same on a per-target basis, then he would have been the tight end 8 last season. And it would be pretty easy to see Jarwin jump to the 83 targets Witten had in 2019. And honestly, we should expect him to remain efficient, right? Because it's not like defenses are going to be able to focus on him. I mean, he's going to be an afterthought on every play. They have to worry about Zeke, Cooper, Gallup, Lamb. At some point, the defense is hoping that you throw to Jarwin, right? So I think he's being severely undervalued because not only is he set up to have a really high finish if he doesn't get lucky with touchdowns, he has a ceiling like Mark Andrews if he does get lucky, because this is an elite offense and someone is going to have a ceiling season in the touchdown department. So this year's Mark Andrews is Blake Jarwin. Who's this year's Chris Godwin? For this prediction, we need to find someone who's going in that 3rd to 5th round range that's played well when given the volume, but hasn't truly broken out yet. And for me, that player is Calvin Ridley. And if we're being honest, the parallels here are scarier than any other parallel I've talked about in this video. He's going exactly where Godwin was last season. He's also playing behind a legitimate number 1 receiver, just like Godwin was playing behind Evans last year. He's on an elite volume passing offense. He's one of just 2 wide receivers on the offense. I mean, we loved Godwin last year because the market share was so condensed, But look at Atlanta. I mean, who's their third receiver, right? Like, they're only throwing to Julio and Ridley at the wide receiver position. And people were all over the 234 vacated targets in Tampa Bay a season ago. Well, Atlanta ranks first by a mile with 258 vacated targets this season, including 18 missing targets inside the 10-yard line. O.J. Howard was getting a ton of hype last season, but he flamed out. Well, a similar thing could happen with Hayden Hurst this season. People assume that he's going to take all these targets, but do we really know if Hurst is any good? I mean, we can't be sure. Godwin was entering his third year last year, which is the same thing Ridley is doing this season, and Godwin was coming off a 59 for 842 and 7 touchdown season on 95 targets. Well, Ridley is coming off 63 receptions for 866 yards and 7 touchdowns on 93 targets. The stat lines are virtually identical, and everyone loved Godwin because of his athletic profile and his route dominance. Well, Ridley isn't some athletic freak that Godwin is, but he's one of the best route runners in football. So I could absolutely see Ridley breaking out this season. So he is my pick for this year's Chris Godwin. So those are some hot takes for the 2020 fantasy football season. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And be sure to check out our website for a bunch of extra information. But that's the end of this one. Hope you all did enjoy. If you did, how about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new? But thanks for watching.